Welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. My name is Rachel Myro, Senior Editor of KQED's Silicon Valley News Desk. And now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, Jimmy Wales, author of The 7 Rules of Trust, a blueprint for building things that last.
Hello. Hello.
So this will come as no surprise to you, but a few words about Jimmy. He's best known as the founder of Wikipedia and the Wikimedia Foundation. Fun fact, Wikipedia will be 25 years old in January. So still free, still open source, still fact-based more often than not to mention available in hundreds of languages ranging from Abkhaz to Zulu. This collectively created online encyclopedia has become part of the commons of the internet and an essential crib sheet for generations of children doing their homework, and for that matter, AI developers looking for training data. So, because this is San Francisco, show of hands, do we have any Wikipedia editors in the audience? Do I see any? Ooh.
Yeah.
Maybe not. There's one.
One in
There's
the back,
one.
yeah.
Okay.
2, yeah.
I just want to say, whoever you are, thank you for your service.
Definitely.
But also Jimmy for shepherding this thing through 25 years with wolves on every side, sometimes in the house. So I thought I'd start off by asking you, for the benefit of those of us with advanced brain rot, who can't grok in the original Robert Heinlein sense of the word, the 7 rules of trust, if there is one rule of trust that you really want us all to hang on to for dear life tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask me every day, I'll probably say something different every day, but just because I was thinking a lot about it today is purpose. So, you know, for Wikipedia and the Wikimedia Foundation, all of that, we've always had this very simple, clear purpose, you know, to build a free encyclopedia for every single person on the planet in their own language. And, you know, by encyclopedia, we mean high quality, we mean neutral, like everybody knows what an encyclopedia should be. And that very clear, simple purpose helps us in all kinds of decision making. And, you know, it's by sticking to the purpose and not doing other things, it has helped us become trusted because you know what you're going to get. When you go to Wikipedia, you should know what you're going to get, and you should get what you think you're going to get, and all that. So, for example, and part of this has to do with our business model, which is a terrible business model. We're a charity, and people give us money, and that's kind of the business model. But the you know, as the internet moved in the direction of chasing clicks and, you know, clickbait headlines and all of that, you know, I always say, like, you know, our article about Thomas Jefferson is just titled Thomas Jefferson, not you won't believe what Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings got up to, you know, like number 3 will make you cry, you know, like it's just not a thing. And so, you know, that simplicity means we're quite, you know, like Wikipedia is Wikipedia. It's kind of boring and kind of amazing. So it's great. So purpose is really, really key.
Wikipedia adheres to 3 core content policies that guide how entries are written. Can you lay it out for us?
Well, this is like a pop quiz. I mean, tell me what the 3 are, because
okay.
we got a lot of lists in Wikipedia. The 5 pillars.
Neutral point of view.
Neutral point of view.
As you just referenced.
Reliable sources.
Be verifiable with information coming from published sources.
Yep.
Including, I presume, some of those journalism articles, right?
Yeah.
No original research.
No original research. Yeah. So all of those are really important. So, you know, no original research, that came about, you know, pretty early on. And I mean, this is, it sounds like I'm just making up a joke, but this is literally true. Somebody started to post, actually sent me a very, very long email with their their theory of magnetism. And as far as I could tell, it was crazy. And there are a lot of physics cranks in the world and so forth. And so this person really wanted to publish their new theory of magnetism on Wikipedia. And I was like, it's hard to say, you sound like a crackpot. That's not very nice. And so instead I was able to just say, well, looks really interesting. I'm not qualified to evaluate it. Probably if you should get it, go and talk to the Harvard Journal of Physics. And if you can get it published there, then obviously we'll cover it. But we can't accept original research. And it was kind of like a light bulb. We're like, yeah, no original research. Like, that's not what an encyclopedia is about. An encyclopedia is about summarizing, all human knowledge. And so for that, you need good quality sources. So reliable sources is very, very important. Neutrality. I can't remember what the third one you said.
Let's see. Publisher, neutral point of view.
Neutral point of view. So neutral point of view is absolutely critical for Wikipedia. And it's one that we always have to grapple with because, getting to neutrality and doing a good job of being neutral is a challenge. It's always going to be a challenge, and that's particularly true on certain contentious topics where, emotions run high and things are really, really difficult. But that's a big part of why people trust Wikipedia. If you come to Wikipedia and you feel like, oh, I'm basically only hearing one side of the story, that diminishes your trust. And it also is a technique that works really well for getting people to work together who may disagree. So my classic example is, imagine a kind and thoughtful Catholic priest and a kind and thoughtful Planned Parenthood activist, and the most important words are kind and thoughtful. They can work together on an article about abortion in good faith, build trust between the two of them, and they both can understand, like the Wikipedia article can't say abortion is a sin, but it can say the Catholic Church position on abortion is thus and such, and the Pope said this, and critics responded that. It's starting to sound like a Wikipedia entry, right? And if they do that and they work together in good faith with each other, then at the end of the day, they can both point at that and say, yeah, we're proud of that. Like, if you come to this, you will understand the societal debate about abortion. You will have learned quite a lot about that. Great, fantastic. And that does actually work. Like, most people are able to do that. Sometimes people will come and they can't do that. Like, they just are like warriors for whatever. They view things in a battleground mentality, and that's problematic. And then they end up getting banned eventually and so on like that.
Forgive the old reporter in me for following the money, but when I see an annual plan listing more than $200 million in spending, I know those aren't big numbers for Silicon Valley. Yeah. Anyway, you've emphasized the foundation doesn't touch editorial. So I wonder, what does that money buy on the day-to-day?
Yeah, so there's, so we're super transparent. There's our whole financial, in fact, our whole strategic process is community driven and all of that. So it's all out there. So obviously there's the tech expenses. So that's the servers and the bandwidth, which is actually not that big because compared to Google or AI or something like that, it's a database that's got some text in it and you just send it out. It's not that expensive, although it's at scale, it's billions of page views, so it's not nothing. There's software developers, there's the DevOps people who keep the site running, like that's super important. Then there's accounting, finance, legal, fundraising. Then there's the local chapters and support for the community. So we have all around the world local nonprofit organizations that are independent nonprofits, but we fund them. Some of them also do their own fundraising locally and things like that. And they're doing things like, doing local mini conferences, recruiting people. If there's always something in Wikipedia that attracts the attention of the media, but if you call California office and say, gee, what about this thing that happened in Bulgarian Wikipedia or whatever? They're going to have no idea, right? So the chapters handle the local and regional stuff. Regional conferences. We also do partnerships with galleries, libraries, archives, museums. we call it GLAM, which is quite fun. When people first started using that term in the community, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize there was a, sort of a GLAM industry term. Now, apparently we made that up. So I'm like, great, we're very good. That's good. So those partnerships are often done with the chapters. The chapters are local, and they'll forge a partnership with the local, like the archive or something like that. So there's a lot of work, but a lot of that work is really about supporting the community.
Let's dig a little into the way of Wikipedia, especially as regards those times when consensus building isn't easy, when you feel compelled, for instance, to restrict editing privileges you've explained abortion, but imagine a topic like the Arab-Israeli conflict, climate change. When you have a situation where the wisdom of polarized crowds doesn't work, what then?
Yeah, so broadly speaking, we don't say the wisdom of polarized crowds isn't working. We say like, oh my God, everybody's going crazy and let's calm down, So the preferred solution in the first instance is, if a big fight breaks out, like a revert war, so people are just going back and forth, and it's not doing any good, the admins will step in and temporarily protect a page. And that we try to keep that very temporary, where like only admins can edit, and that's like we just need to take a break for a little while. In other cases, there are pages that are long-term semi-protected, which normally means you need to have 10 edits and be on the site for at least 4 days, I think are the numbers. So that's basically just to stop drive-by trolling and vandalism. So like if you were to unprotect the article on Donald Trump, it would be like people would be vandalizing it immediately, and it's just a waste of everybody's time. So it's like, but we still want to keep the barrier to entry very low. That's really important. And then, there's a lot of other things. So we have the arbitration committee, and they settle bigger disputes, and sometimes they'll impose longer term restrictions on a whole area, a topic area, just to say, we've got to proceed in a civil way. And it's complicated. Like it's really, there's a lot of discussion about even those things, right? So, like one of the things I always say to people, people say, oh, has the community ever thought of, and I'm like, stop right there. The answer is yes, right? Whatever you're about to say, there's probably a 50-page discussion about it somewhere on Wikipedia, because that's the way we are. Like we talk a lot, and there's a lot of action going on.
Politicians have always twisted the truth for their ends, but in the last quarter century, during Wikipedia's era, we've lost trust in all sorts of authority. Scientific journals, news coverage, academic discourse, the very sources that Wikipedia editors rely on. So how does Wikipedia maintain its own credibility when the public doesn't trust the source material anymore?
Yeah, I mean, this is a complication, like Elon Musk says that Wikipedia is just a tool of mainstream propaganda, and it's sort of like, wow, like this is a really interesting era when we say mainstream propaganda, as like that's kind of weird. Like normally you don't think of it that way, and there's so many factors that have caused all this. We can talk about those. The very difficult financial model for journalism, which means largely the destruction of local journalism all around the world, in the US and everywhere. And I would say a piece of this is the deliberate undermining of trust in authority by certain politicians. That is, it's problematic for all of us. And that's a bigger problem than just Wikipedia, right? It's a problem for all of us. Like if we don't have, in the book, one of the great interviews that we did was of Christiane Amanpour, who is a fantastic journalist, who's one of the few who's still largely viewed with respect on all sides. And she's an old-fashioned, old-school journalist. And, she says, if we don't have a shared set of facts that everybody understands and that everybody agrees these are the facts, and then you can do whatever you want with those facts. We can still have policy debates and all of that, but at least we've got a baseline of like, okay, here's where we are, where are we going to go? And when we don't have that, it makes all other sort of societal policy discussions really basically very, very difficult and impossible, really. So if you think of an issue like immigration, and people can't even agree on a very basic set of facts about, okay, well, how many people are coming in? And I'm not talking about little details around the margins, like really completely different worldviews about what's going on. Like, is it an invasion and we're being overrun? Or is it, there's too many people here who are coming in illegally and that's a problem? Or is it's actually not a problem at all? Different views that are a combination of interpreting, like, how do I feel about it, and then the basic facts. And if we don't have the basic facts, so anyway, I'm speaking obvious things, but it's crucially important. And then, if people think, so I tell this story of like, on Facebook, I saw an old friend of mine posted something, and I was like, that doesn't seem right. And so I just did a quick Google, and I found a New York Times story that sort of contradicted. And, I just posted the link, and he contacted me privately, and he said, I can't believe you would cite the New York Times. Like, they just make stuff up. Like, he literally thought the New York Times, and, if he had said to me, well, New York Times is left-leaning, and they've got to put a spin on this, and like, here's another source you should read, and like, it's, oh, great, now we can grapple with that, right? But if you're just going to say, New York Times, fake news, wow, like, I don't know how we can have a conversation about this topic, because what evidence could I give? What evidence would you accept? It becomes really hard. So I think we all know that this is not sustainable. Like, this is not a sustainable state of affairs. So a big part of what I hope comes, from the book and the conversation, although I'm not sure every single journalist in the world is going to read it and keep it by their bedside and check it every night, but is to say, like, let's think about this problem. Like, what are the concrete practical steps that we can take throughout society to start to rebuild a culture of trust? Because
But I'm
really
going to challenge you there, right? Because you've just said that some very specific people, most of them on one side, but not necessarily,
we're in San Francisco.
for partisan advantage and profit, are trying to tear down journalism's credibility with the public, and they're doing the same thing to Wikipedia.
Yeah,
right?
No, it's
so
a huge problem.
Is this really about journalists or journalistic institutions failing to be neutral enough, or failing to walk this impossible line where everything they say is acceptable to all sides?
So I think it varies, right? Some outlets, another interview we did was with Alessandra Galloni, who's the editor-in-chief of Reuters, and I think Reuters still is very focused, partly because their business model as a wire service is they're selling to newspapers that lean in different ways, and so they have to. But I do think that we do have a lot of media that has become more partisan, and that I don't think that's helping. So I'll give an example. So like, I have an electric car. I love my electric car. It is not a Tesla, and I'm interested in electric cars, and I'm interested in the transition that we're going through, all this. So I live in London, in the UK, and we have two papers that I would consider both to be quality newspapers. We've got more than that. We've got a lot of newspapers, but the Guardian and the Telegraph. So the Guardian is center-left, and the Telegraph center-right. So they both have a slant and all of that, and that's fine. Like that, just different papers, different audiences. That there's nothing particularly wrong with that. However, because I'm interested in this topic, I will often see, like, I think if you went right now and searched, say, over the last week and found a headline about electric cars and read me the headline, I can tell you which paper it comes from, because the Guardian loves electric cars and the Telegraph hates electric cars. And so when I'm reading them, and sometimes there was one example where they both reported on the same study that was done about electric cars and pollution. And wow, you would never know that this was the same study that they had read and reported on, because one was super great about like electric, or another example, headline, electric cars, sales missed targets yet again. Okay, that's the Telegraph. Record electric car sales, The Guardian. Same numbers. It was just like, it was record sales, but they were a little less than had been forecast. So okay, but do we have to be so biased in every single story such that I, as a reader, and I was on the board of The Guardian, I prefer The Guardian, but as a reader, if I read something in The Guardian, I'm always like, yeah, I just wonder what else there is. What am I not being told? How did they slant this story? And I just think that's a problem, because if I don't even trust The Guardian, which is a great newspaper, because I know that they will report things in a biased way, that's problematic. So I just think there are things that can be done, because when you have people who have been radicalized by the president or by social media or whatever, who are aggressively sort of looking to distrust something, they find lots of material, right? Where they go, yeah, look at this story. This is completely unfair. And it's like, yeah, if it is completely unfair, then that's not helping. And so, yes, obviously, it doesn't excuse Donald Trump for all of his sins against the facts of reality. But at the same time, well, we have to all do what we can where we are to try and be neutral, or at least to understand the world in a neutral way. You don't have to stay neutral, right? Once you know what's going on. But that first step, I always think, first just take a deep breath and figure out what is the case. And then you can move on in a more productive way to think what ought to be.
What does Wikipedia do when an authoritarian government disagrees, threatens to block you from its population? I'm thinking of China, Russia, Turkey.
Yeah, well, we pretty much just ignore them and we fight them. So China, we've been blocked on and off, more blocked than not over the years. And, there's a standing offer that we could open in China anytime we want. All we have to do is hand over control to a very well-respected Chinese university who will make sure all the content is legal in China. And we're like, yeah, that's never going to happen. We were blocked in Turkey, and we fought in the courts in Turkey. We fought all the way to the Supreme Court and won, which I'm very proud of, and a landmark decision. And so we're unblocked in Turkey, and it sort of established a bit of precedent there that we think is fantastic. Wikipedia is very popular in Turkey as a result. And then Russia's issued some fines, which we aren't going to pay, and there we are. I mean, Russia's an interesting case because we've been blocked there just for a short. I mean, there was one incident that I thought was particularly amusing and Russian. We were blocked. And then a few hours later, the regulator issued a statement saying Wikipedia has agreed to comply and unblocked us. And we're like, we didn't do anything. We didn't hear from anybody. We have no idea what they're talking about. It's like a circus going on in Russia, So, there's that. But we're not blocked in Russia, which is good. And actually, just a little side story. I met a Ukrainian journalist at a conference, and she said to me, yeah, but what about Russian Wikipedia? What does it say about the war? And I'm like, I hear it's good, but I don't speak Russian. And she's like, well, I'm fluent in Russian. I'm like, well, please, you tell me. And so she went that night and read the Wikipedia entry about the war. And I saw her the next day. I'm like, oh, well, how was it? And I didn't know what she was going to say. And she said, you know what? It was better than I thought it would be. And I had a quibble with a few things. I'm like, I can live with that. That's great. I've got a quibble with a lot of things in Wikipedia. And if we're to the point where you think it's better than you thought it would be, it's pretty good, that's fine. Then whatever is there, we can have a dialogue and you can, that's great. And so the Russian Wikipedians, a lot of them have gone underground. That sounds a little too dramatic, but they've stopped using their old account that was associated with their real name, and they've started using a new account. Simply because it's a difficult time there. And so that's, I'm quite proud of that reaction of the community to, and they don't say special military operation, and they don't say this. Somebody yesterday told me that it's got a lot of bias and Kremlin propaganda in Russian Wikipedia more broadly, and I'm like, okay, like, I'd love to learn more, but I suspect that is as much a function of, people, they write what they know, and they live in a media environment where it's hard to find other sources of information, and the media is all compromised. So of course they're going to repeat some things that maybe people from outside Russia would say, that's a little different, But, like, what's great is the community is really trying hard, and in a very difficult and in many cases dangerous circumstance. And I think that's, like, they're heroes.
You've gone some way towards answering my next question, which is that these Wikipedia editors, ostensibly anonymous, but they've been pressured by governments, not just in Russia, to doctor information. They've been doxxed. Some of them have been compelled to flee their home countries. Mm-hmm. What sense of responsibility do you have personally and, through the company?
I mean, it weighs heavily. It's like we've got Wikipedians in jail in Saudi Arabia. We've, it weighs heavily. And, it's, I don't, we do everything we can, which, by the way, what's interesting is, without speaking to any specific case for reasons that will become obvious, sometimes I'm approached by community members who are like, why aren't you doing more? And it's like, well, actually, we take expert advice. We also talk to the families. And in many cases, the best thing to do is nothing. That they are, they're like, by making it a bigger cause, it can be more dangerous to them, and in other cases, less dangerous. So it's really difficult, but it's not obviously always the case that I should be blasting whoever, in the media, if that's not going to help. And if the family is like, doesn't want us to do that.
Should the foundation provide support for legal fees?
We do.
Yeah,
we do. We do what we can. And, and then, it's like a lot of it has to do with user privacy and data. And like, we do a lot there as much as we can. And it's a horrific environment out there. And, we've never before, it's interesting. There is a sort of standard trope on the right that the Biden administration was pressuring social media companies to censor, blah, blah, blah. And there is, sometimes they say, the Biden administration pressured Wikipedia. Not true. The Biden administration never pressured Wikipedia. We had conversations with them, which are generally like all our conversations with governments is like, here's how it works. Like, let's explain it to you. Like, we want you to understand Wikipedia. But for the first time in my whole career doing this, we got this really crazy letter from DC. He was the interim DC prosecutor, demanding all kinds of answers to questions, many of which were, in my view, deeply inappropriate questions for a government official to be asking, for a prosecutor to be asking, in a country that has the First Amendment. It's sort of like, none of your business. Like, why are you even asking this? This is outrageous. And it's fortunate, right, that we now have really fantastic staff who are very level-headed, because I would have just sort of emailed back and said, dear so-and-so, go f yourself. And you've written the First Amendment at the bottom, Not smart, but that was my first symptom. It's like, well, he off. Like, are you kidding me? And instead, we just answered the question in a very calm and Wikipedia way. Like, oh, yes, in fact, we do allow foreigners to edit Wikipedia. We are a global website. Why are you even asking a stupid question? So
that's Wikipedia. And here we are in this political moment. And I wonder whether you're hearing about Wikipedia editors in the U.S. facing, maybe not directly from government, maybe just wingnuts who feel emboldened or bellicose or upset.
Yeah. I mean, it's a dangerous time. And it's, we had an incident, it was in the news, in New York City, it's like a bunch of nerds. I mean, that's who we are. And we were just doing a mini conference at the weekend, and somebody came on stage with a gun, and our CEO was standing there and threatened to kill himself. His protest was, he had a big sign on non-contact pedophile, which is a whole thing. I didn't even know about this, but like, it's like, I have the urges, but I would never touch anyone. Anyway, like, I'm like, okay. So you can't categorize that as being left-wing or right-wing, really. Like, it's just like mental health and guns, and there's a whole complicated world
I'm thinking
around this.
more, like, so like individual editors, maybe there's somebody who takes offense at the way that they're dealing with some controversial page.
Well, we've never really had
Yeah.
anything like that, but we've just recently had the Heritage Foundation put out a thing saying they were basically planning to dox Wikipedia editors. And I'm like, the Heritage Foundation used to be like intellectually respectable-ish, like a conservative think tank. And it's like, gosh, why don't you go back to writing white papers about whatever? Like, are you kidding me? Like, what is going on here? Like, that's weird behavior and pretty shameful. And I don't know, they should be embarrassed. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I think so. For me, I think we're living in a weird time, but we shouldn't get too paranoid. Like, this can get quite dark. But like, one of the things in the book is like, basically most ordinary people, most people you meet are perfectly nice. I always say, out of 1,000 people, probably 10 of them are quite annoying, but the number who are actively malicious is very rare. And, I just the other day, I was thinking about this, like, you go to McDonald's and you eat your meal and you got your papers left over in your tray, and people, they put the garbage in the garbage can and they put the tray on top and they walk out, and nothing bad will happen to you. If you just leave a mess and just walk out, nobody's going to chase you down. You can totally get away with it and be lazy and be a ridiculous jerk and a slob, but people don't. And like, I'm not talking about, well, good upstanding right-wingers or good upstanding, left-wingers don't, but the other side, they mess up the restaurant. No, everybody does it. Everybody's basically like, oh yeah, of course, like, don't make a mess. And that's, remember that. Like, let's all remember that. And I think when we look at the toxicity of social media or the toxicity of all our politicians, we can draw the wrong conclusion about human nature and about each other and about people who disagree with us politically. And I think that's unfortunate. And I think we really need to sort of take that on and say, you know what, actually, I was just telling this story because I just think it's a fun little example. So I'm a super geek, and I'm making a home server, and I'm going to automate stuff in my house, and it's like my geeky hobby, which I'm desperate to get back to when I get home. But I have to go out and do book tour. And I'm watching this YouTuber called Network Chuck, and he's really funny and he's really great and he explains things very well, and I just enjoy watching him. And just recently, he started doing something. The last 30 seconds of his video, he finishes. He's like, well, that's all the tech stuff. And now I'm going to do something, and it won't be for all of you. He's like, Jesus saved my life, and I owe everything to Jesus, and I'm going to pray for you, my viewer. You don't have to do anything. You can click off whatever, but I'm just going to say a prayer for you. And I'm like, this guy's such a sweetheart. Like, he's just a sweet guy, and I don't have to share his beliefs and all of that, but like, if he has political like positions that are different from mine, and if I knew him in real life, I think we would banter about it, and we would have good conversations, and we would find some middle grounds on certain things, and we would disagree on others. And I don't have to hate the guy. Like, and he doesn't come off as somebody who's hating me. And I think that is the way forward. Like, let's try and rebuild and reheal all of these wounds on a one-on-one level. I mean, not a one-on-one level in this case. Like, he's a famous YouTuber. He's never heard of me. He might have heard of Wikipedia, but, and I just think, yeah, let's have more sweet people who are, they have their beliefs, and he's not trying to shove it down your throat. You can click off if you don't like it. Great.
Well, you're preaching to the converted here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to meet Network Chuck. Love the guy.
So on the left, Wikipedia gets flack in part because the vast majority of volunteer editors are white and male, with all the problems that entails. On the right, critics call Wikipedia wokepedia and claim it's run by a cabal of left-wing activists who may also be white and male. You know, in journalism, we like to say if everybody's angry at you, you must be doing something right.
Yeah, except there is some truth to that. There's also, if everybody's angry at you, you must be doing something quite wrong. Like you haven't satisfied anybody. But yeah, I do think that's right to a degree. But I always, what I believe is like part of what builds trust in Wikipedia. One of the rules of trust is be transparent even when you have something to hide. And I think that's really important. So when we get criticism, it's very tempting to just get defensive and to say, no, we're neutral. Like, if you don't like what we've written, that's because you are biased and you just can't take the truth. But that's a huge mistake, right? It's far better if we, and sometimes that is the case. Like, we look at it and we're like, yep, sorry, actually, this is fine. But in other cases, we should look at it and we should go, you know what, actually, I think we could do better. And I think as long as we maintain that spirit within the community, that when we get an accusation of bias, we shouldn't just hunker down and actually, like, you can't tell me what to do, like that kind of immature attitude. We should go, okay, hold on. Like, we're supposed to be operating on consensus. And if a significant number of people think we're failing in some area, probably we could do better. Probably we need to think about how could we rewrite this in such a way, like our Catholic priests and our Planned Parenthood activists, where we can all be proud that we're like, okay, we've explained the issue, and lots of people on different sides of the question can look at it and go, yeah, that's a good explanation. And so, I have a sort of a different take on some of this stuff. Like when Elon calls us wokepedia, I'm like, okay, that's just not true. Like that literally is not true. But if he says, Wikipedia is biased on this topic, I'm like, okay, maybe we are. Let's take a look. Like, you have to do that because otherwise you end up missing, like, your own blindness. And I think we all know, like, one of the types of blindness, and this is actually why being all white men, although when people say, oh, but Wikipedia is all edited by all white men, I'm like, you've clearly never met the Japanese Wikipedians, right? They're all Japanese people. But it's kind of a jokey response because the truth is those Japanese Wikipedians are also like super nerdy geek men. So, it's not really that different. But, when we look at something like that, what we do see, and my favorite example here, somebody did a study looking at authors who've won major literary prizes. So several prizes were included, and you look at all these authors of major literary prizes, and you look at the length of the articles about men versus the length of the articles about women, and the articles about women are shorter. That doesn't necessarily mean lower quality, but it correlates pretty well. And so what's important to understand is the reason for that is it's not that the male Wikipedians are saying, oh, book by women. Obviously, that's stupid. We're not interested. That's not how it works. It's not active bias against. It's you write about what you know. You write about what you read. And as it turns out, different forms of literature, different authors have a gender balance that isn't 50-50. And, and like the simplest example is hard science fiction. So, hardcore science fiction has a more male audience. They also are geeks. They also edit Wikipedia. So those articles are really great. Other authors maybe don't. And if those people who read that author, major literary prize, fantastic stuff, like, I'm not going to write about that book. I've never heard of that book. I don't read that. Like, it's not within my interest. So we need everybody. We need a very diverse community. And this is where, if and I've seen this before, so Elon calls us Wikipedia, and then people are like, yeah, look at this page. They talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's like, we're global. So diversity means every language. Equity means, like, be fair to everybody. Inclusion, like, it's not about some crazy woke affirmative action concept. It's like, we want the Wikipedia corpus of material to be as comprehensive and high quality as possible, and that requires people who have different backgrounds, different knowledge, different interests, because, we're not, anyway, I could rant about this for a while.
Well, to continue with, to encourage you to continue with the ranting, it's very hard to host a listening circle when bullets are flying. And I'm wondering what you have to say about the moxie of Elon Musk, since you mentioned him, complaining that Wikipedia's liberal bias is infecting the answers his Grok chatbot offers because they're pulling the information from Wikipedia. I mean,
well,
what do you call that? Rich, funny, actively malicious?
I'm just going to say what I think Elon should do is train his Grokopedia bot only on X. It's sort of like, okay, whatever. Like
that would be a real alternative to it.
That would be a real alternative. Yes, exactly. You would find a lot of very angry information. So I haven't had time. I've been on the road since it started. So I do every day. I'm trying to quickly do our emails and quickly do whatever, and then I've got to go do these things. And so I haven't had time to really properly do a deep dive where I spend a whole day like reading through Grokopedia, reading media, and really digging into it. But, early reports are pretty much what I would expect. So the one thing we know about large language models is that they hallucinate a lot and they make stuff up. And even ChatGPT 5, where there was a lot of hype about that problem being maybe not solved, but much better. And it's a little better than before. That's what I would say. But I have this great thing that I do for my own amusement. Every time I see a new large language model, and I do a lot. I bought a really expensive laptop so I can run local models. So I test all these and so on and just play with it a lot. I'm fascinated by the technology. I always ask, who is Kate Garvey? So Kate Garvey is my wife. And she's not a famous person, but she's known in the UK to a certain degree. So she worked for Tony Blair for 10 years, and she promotes the Sustainable Development Goals with the UN and things like this. So, she's known, and she's mentioned in a lot of books about the Blair administration and so forth. So great. And she's kind of the perfect case for large language models to kind of sort of think they know who she is, and then they just make stuff up. And it's always brilliant, and it's always wrong. So one of my favorites, which was one of the first ones I showed her, it said that she set up a nonprofit. Okay, that's true. She set up a nonprofit to promote women's empowerment in the workplace, and that she set it up with Miriam Gonzalez, who is Nick Clegg's wife. Nick Clegg was the deputy prime minister who went on to work for Meta as their global public policy person. Also, we know him and Miriam socially because our kids go to the same school in London. It's a small town. And of course, I know Nick from internet, Meta, and all that. And I showed it to my wife, and she's like, wow, like that could have happened. Like, it easily could have happened. Like, we could have been, like, if they happened to sit together at a dinner party and got to talking in a time before she launched, what she did launch, it's completely plausible, and it sounds like her. In fact, people who know Kate but haven't kept up with her, if they read this, they would go, yeah, that sounds like Kate. That seems possible. And then my next favorite thing is I then ask, and who did she marry? This is always fantastic and always wrong. But it's often people we know, which is quite amusing because our social circle, I always joke, I married into the Labour Party. And but my favorite, well, there's two favorites. One gets an absolute roar of laughter when I'm in the UK, and nobody would know who this is, although you might now. It said, yes, she married Peter Mandelson. Okay, people do know who Peter Mandelson is, because he just got fired as the ambassador to the US because of his associations with Epstein. But we know Peter, and but then I said to ChatGPT, I said, well, isn't Peter Mandelson quite famously gay? And then it got very woke with me, and it said, it's not really appropriate to speculate about people's personal sex life.
That's awesome.
And gay marriage is legal in the United Kingdom. I'm like, yeah, not really my point, but okay. And then another fantastic one was, so Kate's roommate was James Purnell, he was the minister for I forget what he was a minister of. This is before my time. But they were roommates. He's now married to Alexis, who works at Bloomsbury, my UK publisher. So Alexis is my publisher, who I've worked with closely on the book. And so I did an event with Alexis on stage for Bloomsbury, and then she didn't know I was going to show this. And then I'm like, well, just to show you why it can't be trusted, and then I put it up on the screen behind us. It says, my wife is married to your husband. And she laughed so hard she could hardly even finish on stage. It was so fantastic. But, and then you ask it, you're like, oh, wow, that must have been a big wedding. Oh, yes. It tells you all about the guests who came and so on. It's like, wow, that's amazing. Can you, and, I said, oh, can you give me some links to some news stories? And it will cough up links. And you click them, and they're all 404 not found. And then you challenge it, and you're like, these are all fake. And it's like, yeah, actually, I don't know which websites are real or not. And then I'm saying, and sometimes you say, didn't she marry Jimmy Wales? And then it comes to its senses. It does a quick check, and it's like, oh, right, I've been lying, So, so if you think about trying to use this to write an encyclopedia, it's like, that's really a ridiculous idea. It's not even possible yet. Even though, obviously, ask me what's going to look like in 50 years or 10 years. I don't know. It's progressing quite quickly, and that's an interesting thing.
But it's doing something much more nefarious, much more troubling in the present day, regardless of whether or not it's accurate.
And because I don't know where you were going, but one of the things that is dangerous about it from our perspective is the fact that it does give plausible, incorrect information. It thinks what is the next most probable token in this series of tokens. And that leads it to make stuff up that's pretty believable. I'm not sure Peter Mandelson, but pretty believable stuff otherwise, which means that if you try to use it for Wikipedia, you will go down a really bad path because it's harder to detect the errors. If I said, who's Kate Garvey, the first person born on Mars, would be you would go, oh, that's obviously wrong, but it's not obviously wrong. So
be Elon Musk.
Yeah.
No, wait a second. One would imagine that if somebody used AI to write or to edit an article, that other Wikipedia editors would run to the rescue. But there's another thing that is nefarious, and that is certainly a problem for news media, and I imagine it would be for Wikipedia too, which is sometimes it provides links to the quote-unquote source material. Sometimes it doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes, a lot of people don't bother to click. You might click, I might click.
Yeah.
But SEO is dead. Google search is dying. Doesn't this keep you up at night?
No, I'm a really good sleeper. But so there was a study that Pew Research did. And I'm not sure, I'm not going to vouch for it fully, but I thought it was very interesting, which is if you look at the traditional Google search results, the traditional, 10 links, Wikipedia appears on the first page in 3% of search results, according to their study. That sounded low to me, but let's just go with that. And then if you look at the AI summaries, Wikipedia is linked to 6% of the time. So roughly speaking, that's twice as many links to Wikipedia, but people click through those less because you just typed, how old is Tom Cruise, and you got the answer, so you didn't need to click through to Wikipedia to find out the answer. But on net, that's kind of on balance, a similar amount of traffic. Now, that might not hold true forever. And, we've always thought a lot about, Alexa, if people use Alexa or Siri or whatever, and they ask a question and they get the answer on Wikipedia, and Alexa traditionally didn't say, I think it's gotten a little better about this, it didn't say, according to Wikipedia, blah, blah, blah. It just said blah, 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 often directly quoting Wikipedia. So our license, it's completely free. Everything is open source and, freely licensed. And our license requires attribution. That's something. And also, even if from a copyright perspective, it's transformational use and blah, 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 it's not a copyright violation necessarily, but still ethically, it's the right thing to do. Like, say where you got, cite your sources. This is exactly what we teach teenagers. They're writing their first things, and you say you have to put footnotes and so on. But it's actually it is a hard problem for large language models because of the way it works of, ingesting vast volumes of text and then based on that, forming a probability model and predicting the next most likely thing. The model actually has no understanding of anything and no understanding of where it learned anything. It's just got probabilistic tables of whatever. There's a lot of good work going on in grounding and like finding the sources and things like that, but it's still quite weak. And so, I'm a bit understanding about that. But, so I don't know where we're going to get to. I mean, certainly if they're using Wikipedia for knowledge, and people don't realize it came from Wikipedia, that could damage our fundraising. If people are like, oh yeah, I loved Wikipedia, it was great, but we don't need it anymore. Well, you don't need it directly, but the large language models do, because they're not just coming up with things from scratch. So that's important. But we don't know yet. So far, so good.
Well, now comes the time when I share questions from the audience.
Right.
On dissent and diversity in high-tech cultures, you note that dissent strengthens trust. In fast-moving research and development organizations, dissent can slow timelines. What mechanisms have you seen that allow dissent to be voiced productively so that it strengthens innovation rather than paralyzes it?
I mean, that's great. I think there's a lot of research about this, and I am not a researcher and I'm not an academic on trust. So, having read some things, but not an expert, I do think like a big piece of that is generating a culture where dissent is offered with civility and respect. One of the chapters of the book is titled something like "Your Mother Was Right." We teach toddlers to be nice to other people and why that's valuable. And so if you've got a culture, fast-moving research culture, you're trying to get things done, and if you have no dissent, like people are like, oh, hold on, this doesn't seem right, this isn't going to work. And people keep quiet because you've got a hostile environment that doesn't allow people to express things. That also can damage innovation. Now you're going down a path that somebody on the team knows isn't going to work, but they don't feel comfortable saying, oh, by the way, I think there's a big problem here. So if you've got a culture where you can go like, hang on, like we're doing it this way, but maybe we could do it that way. And that's not what everybody thinks, but let's have a thought. That can actually stimulate innovation. So I'm not sure they're contrary to each other, while of course we can also say irrelevant dissent. So certainly organizations that are, they're focused on some particular whatever they're doing. It could be tech innovation, it could be anything. And then suddenly they have like an enormous, like horrific political debate within the team. That's not really helping anybody, and it's really not the right place for it, and I do get that. Like that's, bring your authentic self to work, but don't harangue people. That's kind of like do a little bit of both. So I don't know the magic answer. I always say I'm a terrible manager because I just think, yeah, everybody just go do good stuff, So I'm not the CEO of anything and so on. I'm just me. So I'm not sure I know the best ways, except I observe. And I do think, a little kindness, a little humility, thoughtfulness gets you a long way.
You founded Wikipedia in a much more open, participatory internet. Knowing what you do now about what the internet would become, would you have done anything differently? So
a few things. I'm going to push back a little bit on it being more open and participatory, because it still quite a bit is. And in fact, there's certain elements of it where, certain things are much easier than they used to be. So for example, to launch a website, you used to have to I physically bought servers and I physically went down to the data center and put them in the racks. And now we have cloud services and you can do it quite easily and on a pay-per-use basis that's quite cheap. So starting something is easier. That's only one aspect of the whole thing. People are very open about expressing themselves and their opinions online and so on. It's a bit toxic out there in certain areas, but And then the other part of the question, though, is like, would I do anything differently, given the changes in the environment, and there are some. And I don't know. Like, I don't think so, because, so first of all, I'm a pathological optimist, and I know the reason I use the word pathological is because I know, like, I'm too optimistic always. I always think everything's great. That's just my personality and how I am. So even the things like the mistakes we made, I feel like, yeah, but we learned so much from that mistake. I'm not sure I could have done it without trying that first. So the example would be, wikis existed for 6 years, I think, 5 or 6 years before I launched Wikipedia, but I didn't know about that. So Nupedia, the predecessor, we had a 7-stage review process to get anything published. The basic idea did foreshadow, I mean, there was an element of truth. Like, if we're not even more academic than a traditional encyclopedia, people are not going to trust us, because, like, an encyclopedia written by random people on the internet, what's that? So we need to be super academic. We need to have this review process and so on. Turns out that was not a way to build community. It was not fun. Also, it said to potential participants, you had to fax in, and that's how old this was, fax, for the kids in the audience, it was like a piece of paper, you put it and it went through the phone. And anyway, it said to people, like, we don't trust you. Like, you got to prove you're even qualified to be here. And that was a wrong approach and a wrong attitude. But by doing it and finding all these people of goodwill who were excited and they wanted to do it and they were trying, but we made it too hard and so on, that was a learning experience. And also we spent 2 years talking about how to make an encyclopedia and talking about neutrality and talking about all these things that were good to know once we finally did get started in 2001. But of course, like, I realized, like, the technology of Wikipedia is, you need a web browser, you need a web server, you need a database, you need the idea of wiki. Then you can get started. Like, it's really simple, and that existed. I could have started 2 years earlier. Just started with Wikipedia and not wasted the time on Nupedia. Maybe not. Like, it's hard to say. So there's not too many things, even things where I'm like, oh, wow, we did that wrong. Like, Nupedia was a failure. But I learned from it, so I can't really say. And that's actually a way, going forward for young entrepreneurs and so forth. That's why I'm always like, just get started. Like, you'll screw up, but, like, you'll learn a lot from screwing up, and that's actually part of the process.
How did you build such an active, self-sustaining community? In particular, how did you solve the cold start problem when starting? And how do you keep the community engaged when other community projects like Twitter Community Notes have failed to maintain momentum?
Oh, okay. I think Community Notes is still quite successful, but I don't know. Actually, I've not seen that I don't know. That's interesting. Hadn't heard that. But anyway, every time I go on Community Notes, that's like the only thing I like about Twitter anymore. It's like, oh, rate this weird comment. Oh, yeah, great. Yeah, cite sources. Yeah, good. So I think, so the cold start problem, that's an interesting question, because I don't think I've ever been asked quite that in that way, because cold start problem isn't a question you would get in Chicago. Like, that's a very San Francisco question, the cold start problem. So, part of it was we had gathered a community of people who were interested in writing an encyclopedia. And we did that for 2 years. And they weren't thinking about, it wasn't about online website engagement and all that. They were thinking they're going to have to, like, type up documents and do research and send it in. So already this was a community who were pretty comfortable with things being a little bit clunky. And then, part of it was, and this is actually, there is a difference between Wikipedia and Wiktionary. So Wiktionary is our dictionary project, which is now successful. But so a dictionary, this is just my personal view, a dictionary doesn't really become that useful until you've got a lot of obscure words that people would go and think, oh, I need to know what this word means. I need a really big dictionary because I've never heard this word before. Whereas an encyclopedia article is perfectly useful from day one if you search in a search engine and you find that. And so early on in the history of Wikipedia, I used to make a page. I would look at the referrer logs and see people coming from Google and see what they were looking at. And then I would rank things, and I made a page, which I updated, once a week or whatever for a while, called What Google Likes. And this was not in Wikipedia, but, on the, off to the side. And what was interesting is like the community was quite interested in that, like because they wanted it to be successful, and they were like, oh, like we're here to write. What are people interested in? You could look at that and see patterns. You would be like, ooh, looks like World War II is a perennially popular topic. Let's write more stuff about World War II. Like people are interested in that history, and so that was a piece of it, like being really transparent with the statistics and all of that, because it sort of. I remember saying to someone like this group of like volunteers that they're as sort of ruthlessly eager to help this get popular as you would have at the best startup, like where they really are obsessed with the numbers and like, oh, what can we do that will get a little more traffic every day? But also just the other piece is like, and this is what Nupedia lacked, is the actual process had to be fun. Like it had to be interesting. Like you're engaged in writing something and someone else is helping you and so forth. Like back then, you could be the first person to type Paris is the capital of France and hit save. Yes, I have written the article about Paris. Like it was terrible, right? But you were the first person to do it, and that was kind of cool and kind of fun. And then you come back 3 days later and people had added like another paragraph and another this and that, also fun. So the fact that the product, so going back to that sort of cold start problem, that sort of product way of talking, like the product was already useful from day one, useful for the editors, like you could already have fun doing it. And in fact, in some ways it was more fun because you're like, oh wow, like I can get started on this whole topic area and be the first person to do it. But also the product, the finished work, was also valuable for readers quite early on. Like maybe the article about Paris, France, wasn't as long as it is today, but it didn't take long for it to be long enough that if you search Paris, you found this, like, yeah, it has a lot of facts. Like that's probably what you were looking for. So I think we were very lucky. Whereas Wiktionary did take longer to take off, and even today isn't as popular. Maybe the name Wiktionary isn't so great. But it took longer because, like, when's the last time you looked up the meaning of the word dog? Like, I mean, it's in the dictionary, but like nobody needs that. But you might look up something more obscure, but we didn't have many articles, so.
What do you believe is the future of the open web?
Well, I'm quite optimistic, but as I've cautioned, I'm always optimistic. But this is not a new sort of discussion and debate and all of that. Like there was a lot of concern, like when Facebook was really growing a lot and Facebook was adding more and more features, like is Facebook going to become the walled garden and people won't even know like there's an internet out there, they'll just use Facebook and they'll think that's the whole internet. And that hasn't happened. That clearly hasn't happened. And so, one of the things that I do think is very important is the very low barriers to entry for making a website. And, that open source software has been massive for this. Even like back in the day, if I had needed to buy a license for Oracle database for $20,000, there was no $20,000 around, but instead I could use MySQL and it was free and that was fine, And so that kind of thing is, like, as I mentioned earlier, like the barriers to entry to start a website and do some things, you use serverless and use whatever, or open source software, like it's really cheap. And so that's important and we need to keep that sort of vibrancy. But there are new sort of threats to that. So what if everybody stops using like general random websites and they just go to ChatGPT or their favorite large language model and they never leave that confines? They just do that and they don't bother clicking out, and that's the life they live. I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that is the future, because I think people are always interested. Like, it's quite useful, but that's one use case. Like I use ChatGPT and Gemini, but quite a lot for one kind of use case. I was going to Amsterdam for the Vermeer exhibit, which was like a once in a lifetime. They brought almost every Vermeer in the world for this great show. I was taking the kids, and so I just described to ChatGPT, because first I Googled things to do with kids in Amsterdam, and that just gets you acres and acres of crap, like spammy websites with like bloggy, it was very familiar to me for my other use case, which is I love to cook and I love cooking, and there's nothing worse than a cooking blog that goes on for 4 pages about my family hates vegetables, but blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I just want the recipe, please. And anyway, so I just asked ChatGPT, I'm like, oh, here's the family, here's the ages of the girls, and I'm interested in this, and so on. What should we do? And it gave, I said, make me an itinerary for a 3-day trip. It gave a great itinerary, and I'm like, just one thing in the morning, one in the afternoon, we don't want to be too stressed. It was great. We didn't end up doing it because actually a human friend of a friend sent me their list of things. I'm like, ooh, this is better than ChatGPT, so we did that instead. But that's one use case which doesn't compete with Wikipedia. It does compete with the open web of these sort of spammy travel blogs, which are super annoying, and they're not all like some of this is like whatever. There's a lot of junk. I use it for cooking, although I do warn, like, make sure you know how to cook before you use ChatGPT to get a recipe. Because
is that something you're saying from a place of experience?
Well, when you look at it and it's like, I think that's a lot of salt, like I'm not so sure. You might have hallucinated a bit there. And if you know how to cook and your experience, you go like, yeah, that's too much salt. If you're not experienced cook, you might just go, yeah, great. 6 tablespoons of salt. Seems a lot, but whatever. It's a robot and it knows, Yeah, probably not. So
use your head. Use your common sense.
Yeah. But but ultimately, I think there will be these use cases that will compete. Everything competes with everything in some sense for attention and time. But there are other use cases and things that it doesn't. It's not really the place. So one example that is very interesting, I was just reading about this recently, Stack Overflow. It's a website where, like, here's the traditional use case, mine, but I think lots of people. I'm programming, and I'm not a good programmer. I enjoy programming. I do it as a hobby, but I'm rusty and I'm old and all that, and I'm trying to learn a new language, and I hit an error message. I Google the error message. I end up on Stack Overflow, and hopefully somebody had the same problem and somebody told them how to fix it, and life is good. That didn't work well, but it was the best thing we had. Now I just go to ChatGPT and I'm like, oh, here's what I'm doing. Here's this. Bam, it's really good at that. It explains it and so on. Stack Overflow, I read their traffic is down by about 90%. So 10% of what it was a few years ago. So, wow, I'm glad that didn't happen to Wikipedia overnight. But we have seen a little bit of a drop in traffic, but it's kind of hard to interpret, and so we're not too worried. So some things will change, but there are other things that people do that are going to, they're chatting to a robot isn't my only thing I do in life, and that's not really what I want to do. I mean, I think I actually really like watching Network Chuck. I don't know why I keep going back to him, but again, he's a human, and I like that he's a human. You could replace Network Chuck with an AI, and it wouldn't have the same meaning to me, because while I'm watching it, I don't think
the AI isn't going to pray for you.
It isn't going to. I mean, it could be programmed to pray for me. I could tell it to pray for me, and it would say, whatever, really fantastic idea, Jimmy, because it's very obsequious. The AIs, they're like, that's a really good insight. I will pray for you. Great. Okay, thanks. Doesn't feel that meaningful, right? Whereas with Chuck, I'm like, oh, that's really sweet. Great. And just as he's joking around, coffee break time, I'm like, yeah, coffee break, Chuck, yeah.
Well, that's a very optimistic, hopeful, and curious.
I mean, everybody's getting a really good idea of what I'm like and what my life is like when I'm at home. I'm in my basement like a good basement-dwelling nerd, and I'm watching, I'm like, yeah, Chuck, let's have some coffee.
Our thanks to Jimmy Wales, author of The 7 Rules of Trust, a blueprint for building things that last. We encourage you to pick up a copy of Jimmy's book here or at your local bookstore, maybe even in person. And for information about Commonwealth Club World Affairs membership, please visit www.commonwealthclub.org. I'm Rachel Myrow. Thank you and take care.